Joining us now on Florida This Week is Betty Villamontes. She is a Cuban-American author, written about the Cuban experience across the U.S. Betty, in the past, in the history of Cuba and the U.S. relations, there have been different moments where many exiles thought, this is different, there seems to be a change. Do you think that that is happening now, or do you feel that it's too early to tell?
Part of me thinks that it might be a little bit early to tell. However, I want to think, because that this is different. I want to think that there's no way that this government can continue. What are they trying to do? They want to commit genocide on their own people. They need to realize that the time has come, that they have not done anything for this country other than oppress them, put young people in jail just for speaking out. That it's time for Cuba to be free.
Do you feel that the images of the trash in the streets and the calls from Cubans on the island saying that they have no power, that they have no food, do you think that most of the American people really understand what's going on in Cuba?
They don't. They really don't. And I've talked to people within the island. I know people from Havana. I know people from other provinces like Villa Clara, and I know what they're going through. And no one here has any idea of what it is to go to bed and not know where you're going to be able to eat.
Are the folks that you're talking to in Cuba now, are they saying that this is the worst that it's ever been?
This is the worst they've seen. And these are people that have been there from the very beginning. People whose family lost their store. That kind of people, and this is the worst.
Well, thank you so much for sharing your perspective with us. We appreciate you coming in.
Thank you very much for inviting me.
And we continue now the conversation with Victor De Mayo. We recently spoke with him about Cuba at this crossroad. De Mayo is the president of the Hillsborough County Democratic Hispanic Caucus, and this is what he had to say. So many in South Florida and even here in Tampa are asking, is this the moment where the Castro regime, the communist regime, falls?
Right.
And then others say we've heard that before.
Right.
What are you hearing?
Well, do we have an hour? But because we don't, you and I both have Cuban roots. We have, we came from families who were born and raised in Cuba. And what I tell people is Cuba is very complicated. And this ties into what we want to discuss, because I guess the overriding fact is, will Cuba become the next, what happened in Venezuela? Will they go in and pluck out whoever? And actually, Mr. Canales is a new head of Cuba because Fidel Castro passed away. His brother Raul is no longer, running the government. Although some people say he does.
He was appointed by the Cuban parliament. It wasn't an election, but he was appointed president.
Right.
Yes.
By the parliament. So they've had their special period when Russia fell. They were supporting Cuba. And things were very, very bad in Cuba. Things were very tight for a lot of people. Suffered a lot in Cuba. People are suffering today in Cuba.
And the images of Cuba now are very disturbing.
Right.
With trash on the streets because there's no fuel for the trash collection trucks.
Right.
So is the question some people are asking, many people are asking, is should we take action and just end it and go in? And others are saying, no, we should let the Cuban people decide for themselves.
I think the biggest mistake people make about Hispanics, Latinos, in comparing countries, whether it's Puerto Rico to Cuba, or Venezuela to Cuba, or Colombia, or Mexico to Cuba, every one of those countries are vastly different from the other.
Yes.
They all have their own different uniqueness. Cuba is not Venezuela. Yes, they were friends, the presidents were friends, but Venezuela enjoyed a lot more prosperous because of the vast oil that they had in Venezuela. And frankly, I still don't understand what happened in Venezuela, because they cut the tail of the snake off, but the snake is still there. The same people that raped and pillaged Venezuela are still running the country. So the people, I don't know what the Venezuelans can even celebrate now. And we made it perfectly clear we're in there to grab their oil, which is what we've done, sadly, for 100 years. So
well, not everyone would agree with that statement.
Well, I'm serious, but that's what's going on. I mean, is there freedom? No. Is there elections coming on? No. Who's running the country? Well, number 2 that was underneath Maduro. So what does that mean? Venezuela's a mess. Now, we were talking about Cuba. How does that translate to Cuba? I don't see, I think, you know, we have talked, I say we, the people in the United States, the people who have left Cuba that come here, they've talked ad nauseum for Cuba has suffered the longest embargo, right, for 65 years. They've had an embargo, and what has it done? Has it changed the government? No. They've maintained this sort of communist, if you want to call it that, Marxist, if you want to call it that, type of government, which China does well under, I guess if you want to call it that, except for their freedoms, but financially they're doing better. So Cuba is very unique.
We want to thank you for joining us on this special edition of Florida This Week, Cuba at a Crossroads. It certainly feels as if the U.S.-Cuba relations continue to change by the day. In the past week alone, tensions have flared in Cuban waters. 4 people on a Florida-registered boat were killed by Cuban border guards. The Cuban government says those on board were heavily armed and planned terrorist actions. The U.S. is investigating. Meanwhile, Canada and Mexico have pledged food aid as the U.S. blockade continues. And South Florida Republican lawmakers are urging the Trump administration to reopen a criminal investigation into Raul Castro. As we process all the geopolitical news, let's not forget the people living in Cuba. While preparing for this show, we received 2 emails from Cuban citizens. They are verified to be authentic. One was written at 2:40 in the morning, the other just before 6 a.m. The first one reads, "We are living extreme hard times in our country. For many years, we had seen Cuba-U.S. relations over several ups and downs, but we never felt this kind of treatment. We are being treated like enemies. Cubans feel that some people want us to live with no food, no medicines, unable to get proper medical services, no schools, no transportation to our daily activities, and no fuel for our basic everyday duties to survive. They are trying to suffocate the Cuban people in here," end quote. And the second message reads in part, "What have we done to deserve this? Are we a plausible threat to the mere existence of the United States?" It continues on to say that my people are suffering the unthinkable. With no oil, tourism is declining. Industries are not working. People are losing their livelihoods. And worse than that, we will be losing our sovereignty, end quote. It's a lot to think about. Thank you for joining us on Florida This Week.